Welcome to Fuzzy's Opinion. This channel is about matters pertinent to Jamaica and the Caribbean. Today's video is about Singapore's rapid rise to economic success. Singapore, a small Southeast Asian nation of 5.9 million people, is today one of the world's most developed countries. Its economic and social indicators often rival and sometimes outperform those of America and other developed nations. Singapore government is one of the most transparent and least corrupt in the world, which is due in large part to zero tolerance for government corruption and very high salaries for government ministers. Singapore's Prime Minister's salary is $2 million per year, while the Deputy Prime Minister earns $1.8 million per year. This meteoric rise to becoming an economic powerhouse is attributable to one man, Lee Kuan Yew. When Lee Kuan Yew became Prime Minister of Singapore over 50 years ago, Singapore was a backward country plagued with ethnic strife, poverty, and illiteracy. At the time, 75% of the population lived in slums, and the illiteracy rate was about 40%. And with a GDP per capita of less than 600, Singapore at the time had poor infrastructure and insufficient access to water. Facing serious economic, social, and infrastructure issues in the newly independent Singapore, Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew sought international assistance, but his pleas, for the most part, fell on deaf ears. During this time, one of the places he visited in his search for an economic model that could put his country on the path to success was Jamaica, where he met with Prime Minister Michael Manley. He chose to visit Jamaica because, in addition to both countries being small nation states, both Jamaica and Singapore were post-colonial societies in the early days of transitioning to self-rule. Economically, Jamaica at the time was in a far superior position than Singapore. When Prime Minister Yew returned to Singapore, he didn't adopt Michael Manley's socialist ideology. He instead chose a more pragmatic approach to governance. He began to pursue a vision of comprehensive industrialization, but quickly realized that this endeavor was hampered by an inexperienced labor force, a small local market, and hostile neighbors with whom it was difficult to establish trade. Having encountered these obstacles, Lee Kuan Yew began to embark on a new strategy of economic development. This time, he sought to bring in multinational companies to set up manufacturing in Singapore, an endeavor he realized could only be hampered by the prevailing crime and public disorder in his society. As a result, Yew adopted a zero-tolerance approach to crime and disorder. Anyone caught dealing drugs or involved in any corruption was immediately executed, and anyone who threatened political or institutional unity was imprisoned without due process. And most trade unions were also suppressed. These draconian measures, which Yew saw as pragmatic and necessary, brought about a social order that made Singapore attractive to investors. And within 7 years of implementing these policies, 25% of the companies in Singapore were owned by foreigners, and the country's GDP was growing by double digit annually. With this success, the government began to focus on human development by building technical schools and encouraging foreign companies to train local workers in the areas of information technology, petrochemicals, and electronics. Today, Singapore is a developed nation with a highly skilled workforce, a stable society, and a transparent and, for the most part, corrupt-free government. How did Lee Kuan Yew achieve this? Lee Kuan Yew, unlike most post-colonial leaders, rejected democracy and elevated Asian values. He deemed liberal democracy to be a flawed system that protects the individual at the expense of society and produces social dysfunction, poverty, and lawlessness. He adopted instead a pragmatic, benevolent dictatorship rooted in Asian values that elevate society over the individual. This has led to great economic success. Singapore today has one of the highest GDP per capita, highest literacy rate, and lowest unemployment rate. However, many Western critics bash Singapore and deem its government an unacceptable dictatorship. But Singapore's economic indicators prove that liberal democracy isn't the only system that can lead to success.